Ben and Wes, you guys can see my screen okay?
Yes, sir.
Looks good.
Well, let's just go ahead and kick things off here. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. This is the Emerging C-Store Trends and Challenges webinar presented by Titan Cloud Software, focusing on how small operators can compete and win in today's marketplace. I am John Kelly with Titan Cloud, and with me today on the call is Ben Thomas and Wes Rowe. So Ben, do you want to just give your kind of quick intro and background about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, John, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. Excited to share with you things we've learned over the years. I'm Ben Thomas. I live on Whidbey Island, Washington, and I've actually, it's hard to believe, 34 years plus in the UST industry. I started off as a state regulator in Vermont and Alaska, and for almost 20 years now, I've had my own independent consulting company that kind of turned into a major training system out there. Started off with lots of live face-to-face training, help operators understand UST compliance rules, and shifted largely to the online environment. I'll be talking about some of the advantages of leveraging technology today. So talked to a lot of operators after all these years, still get excited about helping operators, come up with new strategies, how to stay productive and good risk managers. So yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Good to be here.
Ben. And I believe, Ben, you will also be speaking on compliance and technology at the upcoming Impact show. Is that right?
Yes, I'll be in Indianapolis next week. So if anyone's mid-continent is going to be at the Impact trade show, I'll be giving a special talk about leveraging internet technologies to improve UST compliance. And thank you, John.
Very good, you bet. And if anyone sees Ben at NACS this year in Vegas, it'll probably be at a nightclub because he likes music. And
cat's out of the bag.
All right, Wes, how about you?
Hi, my name is Wes. I'm a bean counter in the C-store world. Been a bean counter for, I don't know, 20 years, I guess now, but been in the C-store space for the last 12 of it. Love the industry, super nimble, been part of a fast growing small local chain that deals with a lot of the challenges that we're going to talk about today. So I'm here just to kind of lend some perspective and kind of what we experience and what we found successful and what we still struggle with.
And it's S-Step Energy based in Kentucky, right?
That is correct. Yep.
All right, very good. Cool. Well, we'll kind of kick things off here, run through a quick agenda at a high level, and then really get into the meat of what we're going to be talking about, which consists of regulations, some thoughts on the industry consolidation that's been going on, and some opportunities for smaller operators. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. Hopefully those in the audience can chime in and pick our brains. This will be recorded, so if you have to drop off or whatever, we will be sending out a recording afterwards. If you do have questions throughout, don't hesitate to type them into the chat box. And if we can't get to them, then we will certainly follow up with you post-webinar. With that out of the way, we're just going to dive right in and start talking about regulations and compliance. So for those who don't know, I imagine most who are dialed in probably do know that there are some relatively new UST compliance rules, regulations, and also metrics now in effect. This table and chart that I'm showing here was from an EPA presentation a couple of weeks ago about the new compliance rules and regulations, and they highlighted some of the common violations that they have found in their research. Ben, given your background on compliance and in compliance, can you just share some perspective on some of the new compliance rules, some of the new metrics like the total compliance rate, and some of what we commonly see out there in the field?
Absolutely. So contrary to what some may think, EPA and the states have been tracking the success of the underground storage tank program since 1988. So we've got decades worth of information. We don't just, put out a bunch of rules and hope for the best. The feds query all the states every year, and they compile that compliance information. How are we doing on spill bucket prevention and so on like that? And so we've actually have a great long history, and EPA and the states are committed to improving those compliance numbers. They're always trying to be the best state or federal program tank agency we can be. And so, John, if you could move the cursor on top of the first block where it says in compliant. Yeah. So what this means is that in the last couple of fiscal years, we're at about a C plus as far as our spill buckets, and the spill bucket of the spill containment manhole is the area around the fill opening. How are spill buckets doing across the country? They're mostly there. They're mostly tight. They're mostly clean and dry. They're mostly in compliance, but we're still at kind of like the C plus, almost B minus level. So we're doing pretty good score there. If you move over one more box, John, overfill prevention. So we're talking about flapper valves and high level alarms at a UST site. We're doing about the same there. Most sites have an overfill device. They're being tested. They're working properly, but we're still kind of in the C plus kind of arena. We're doing better in corrosion. Moving over one more box, John. There are standards by which you have to test and make sure steel tanks are not, and steel piping is not corroding. And so we're actually doing a lot better there. We're seeing like in the A minus kind of grade. So we're doing pretty good with spill buckets. We got a C plus for the spill buckets. We got C plus for overfill device, got a A minus in the corrosion protection. However, when you start looking at leak detection, are my tanks and piping leaking? And do we have the right equipment? Is it being maintained properly? Are we keeping good records? The numbers drop off quite a bit. We're down to like the C minus D plus level. And we're finding it, because of some new leak release detection rules, it's been a little harder to achieve compliance. Now, since 2015, all the states have adopted new rules, so that the goalposts have changed somewhat. We're having to do more testing, more inspections, more compliance management, more training. And so now the number for all that has kind of plummeted. I think with any new system, once you introduce a set of new requirements, you would expect the compliance rates to kind of drop, and then they should kind of bounce back up. And so what this tells me, there's still a lot of people out there not testing their spill buckets, not doing overfill device testing, not certifying their tank gauges, not testing their sumps, and so on like that. So we are looking at a pretty significant challenge here.
I agree, Ben. I think it's interesting, and thank you for kind of walking us through the different sort of facets of compliance. I think, one of the interesting things to me about this chart is the common violations that are observed. And you mentioned how the leak detection rates really are in pretty poor territory as far as the grade is concerned, if you will. Wes, do you want to talk about some of these common violations and maybe how operators can address them? Because in my mind, some of these things are relatively low-hanging fruit that maybe they're just not paying attention to, maybe they're just not aware of, but hopefully should be easily addressed.
I know there's folks out there that are like us, and compliance is, while it's very important, it's not always at the top of the list. So our approach to compliance is it is very important, but there's things that we are equipped to handle and do, and there's things that we aren't equipped and handle to do. But as you look at this list, this is pretty, to say it's low hanging fruit is really an understatement. The release detection, the missing monthly walkthroughs, the spill preventions, those are all things that are related to folks that we already have on site and frankly should be in tune to that kind of stuff. The piping release detection, when you start getting to sump monitoring and opening lids, we don't like our folks in there. And that's just where you have to kind of draw a line and know that you've got to bring some folks in to help you out with, meeting those requirements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we discussed a little before the call how you've kind of developed internally a sense of what are the types of things that you're comfortable doing internally and some of the things that you're not comfortable internally. And it's about managing cost and balancing cost with risk, right? Because when you people going into sumps and stuff like that, there's certainly some risk exposure to your facility and to your people that are at the facility, and you want to make sure you're mitigating that. And there are certainly vendors out there to help with that kind of thing. One of the things that we also touched on, Ben, is the role that technology can play in terms of helping improve compliance. Obviously, as we talked about, you're giving a presentation on internet technology and how it can help with UST compliance at the Impact show coming up. But do you want to share some thoughts on, maybe some areas where smaller operators in particular can benefit from technology?
Absolutely. a good analogy is that we all used to stick our tanks to do inventory control and leak detection. Then the tank gauges came along. And so most operators now should have an automatic tank gauge on their wall to look for it. But that's not even good enough, because now, as I'm sure you know, John, operators can now get flooded with information. So you've got all this information coming out of your tank gauge. And so kind of bringing automation to the next level, you rely upon a service that can double check your alarm conditions, double check your inventory, and go through all the noise, and therefore give you a clear sense of what's going on. So just simply having a digital solution, a stick to a tank gauge, a clipboard to an online form, we're continuing to refine those things. And so pretty much any facet of what we're doing with fuel management or compliance management, there is a digital solution for. And it's been an interesting year for me, because I've watched it all kind of grow up over the years, having left the stick behind, as it were. And there's way more out there than I even was aware of it until I kind of did like a fairly good survey of the choices that were out there. Even up until recently, I've added more section to my presentation. Oh, and we can now kind of automate that too. And I think what's cool about that is that if you're reasonably computer savvy, you can really make a lot out of the digital solutions that I think previously only large companies had like the infrastructure and the skill set to use. And so I'm really excited how there can be these digital solutions. And as we know, the more you kind of, we're all trying to take the human error out of the things that get us into trouble in the first place, right? So like if you're missing leak detection, then outsource it to a company that tracks it for you and reminds you when your leak detection record is due. I mean, it's, we're just leveraging a calendar so we don't miss a date, kind of thing like that. And so I'm excited that there's so many tools out there. The challenge is that there's so many vendors out there. It's a matter, it does take a little bit of shopping, but rest assured that the things are out there to improve compliance overall using technology, and in particular, internet technology.
Excellent. Wes, do you have any thoughts on that before we?
I do. So as part of this, we were alluded to earlier, three of these four bullet points are people related, and the people come into play in kind of twofold, right? Their education and knowing kind of what's going on and knowing what's going on with the equipment, not just from a compliance standpoint, but just operational standpoint, delivers customer. We find the customer service is way better. They're able to troubleshoot. The site goes down, they're able to get the site up quicker. So there's a lot of ancillary benefits that come with some basic level of education surrounding, a lot of these things, whether it's the monthlies or whether it's, knowing how to get the correct report off of the Veeder-Root. To Ben's point, I mean, the Veeder-Root will tell you everything that there's way more information in that thing than most of us need to know on a daily basis. But knowing, hey, I need to run this report. This test needs to be run monthly. It's not hard. Just need to tell it to remind it to do that. And just, knowing how to navigate some of the technology is really where we find some of the challenges, and it's just education,
Yep.
And John, if I can throw in one more thing, I mean, I do operator training. By law, an operator needs to know what all the rules are. What the regs kind of fail to direct people is who does what, when do they do it, how do they do it, what forms they need. I go to great length in my training to say, okay, here's all this stuff. You can be doing that, but like what Wes was saying, this is really above your pay grade and your expertise. So, figuring out who does what and when, and calendarizing everything and assigning those people, if you can get that laid out, you can have a really good program. And the regs don't actually tell you how to do that. That's just kind of like an afterthought of sifting through all the complexities of the regs. So so an idea is to really know what the tasks are, designate them, calendarize them, and then outsource the stuff that's too much for you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ben, for sharing that. I completely agree. They don't get into the kind of assigning of responsibilities. They just kind of tell you what needs to get done. And before we just move on from the regulations piece, I will just add something that Wes mentioned earlier, because Wes, you've talked about, you guys are leveraging technology where appropriate and where it makes sense within your small operation. But one comment that you made when we were discussing the sort of state of affairs for the industry before the call was that technology has become a lot more accessible from a cost standpoint,
Sure.
And the quality of technology has become higher. And so smaller operators don't necessarily need to think, only the 7-Elevens and the Circle Ks of the world are going to have access to the types of tools and systems that I need in order to help with some of the automation that Ben just commented on.
if and it kind of again just kind of I'm going to jump out of the regulatory mindset for a second, but I kind of parallel it to kind of the loyalty. Loyalty used to be app development and all kinds of background software and all of these things that were very expensive and required very specific skill sets. That's become a much broader market, and the access to those kind of loyalty programs is really become. I'm not saying it certainly isn't cheap, but it's certainly more accessible and it's certainly less expensive than it was. Same thing with regulation here. Whether it's through tank gauges or ATGs, or whether it's remote tank gauge. I mean, there's all kinds of solutions that give you a very easy, quick, efficient line of sight into your compliance that wasn't available 10, 15 years ago.
Yep, 100%. Very good. Well, let's switch gears here a little bit and move on to the topic of consolidation and industry consolidation. I've thrown up a couple of statistics here that I thought were interesting. I was watching a presentation from the last year's Sigma event, and Matrix Capital was sharing some data on the volume of M&A deals, and the average number of M&A deals that have involved in at least 10 retail stores or at least 25 wholesale locations has been 32 since 2012, which means a lot of stores are changing hands. And we know that because you'll see the headlines every single day if you subscribe to the newsletters of the industry. So-and-so is buying 13 stores from them and 5 from him, and yet at the same time, we're also seeing the total C-store count continue to decrease. Interestingly, the bulk of that, the overall, it's a net negative, but single store operators are driving all of that decrease. Chain operators are actually adding some stores to their portfolios. But I think it's kind of interesting. You've got all this consolidation going. The smaller operators are kind of getting weeded out, especially if they have bad locations or they don't really understand what they're doing, so on and so forth. Yet 64%, I think it is most recently, of the industry is made up of these single store operators. And so they are really kind of the backbone of the industry. And then you've got the smaller chains that represent another big chunk of the industry as well. And I wanted to get each of your thoughts on what makes small operators unique and competitive in a world where maybe the total C-store count continues to go down, maybe the big guys are getting bigger, but what is it about small operators that makes them stand out and will allow them to stand up to the big boys?
Mm-hmm.
It's you're part of as a local operator or small operator, your advantages are in our world, and the way we look at it, you're nimble, and we're able to react quickly to our customers' demands, to what they want, what we see in the marketplace, and we're able to get that in their hands quickly. We're also we in some of our prior conversations, we drink the same water that all of our patrons do. So we have a vested interest in making sure that our sites are, we're not dumping water, we're not putting gasoline in the creek that's feeding our plant. I mean, just be brutal about it, our water plant. But, it's local. We're part of the community, and whatever community that we're in, we're invested, and we need to treat that community with care and respect that you may or may not get from a large chain that's worried about nothing more than economics.
No, I think that's a very valid point. Ben, you've seen countless small operators. Do you want to share some of your perspective, maybe piggybacking?
I'm sure I've been to at least 1 to 100, what I'll call mom and pop C-store operators in every state in the country, including U.S. territories, Alaska, Hawaii, so on. And I'm always struck by how these convenience store, gas station, pit stop depots, in many instances, are the center of the community. Little island on Hawaii, everyone goes to buys gas, and everyone knows everyone else. The Swinomish Indian tribe has a great little Chevron station, and I spent enough time at these stores doing compliance trainings or videos or whatever, and you really get a sense really quickly that people are coming there because they know people, and the C-store can be the center of news and gossip and community, and so I see these institutions as being the kind of the centerpiece for community exchange. People like going there because they see people they know, the person behind the counter. I think Wes, you were saying, yeah, here's your, your Diet Mountain Dews already.
They've got your smokes, your Diet Mountain Dew ready to go. They know what you're smoking.
Exactly, yeah. And so there's kind of an aesthetic, or I don't even know what the word is, but I've seen in every community type and state and territory and whatnot that C-stores do provide a critical place for people just to get together. And what I like to see is those store managers who have an inherent grasp on the risk, because while it's all like fine and good on the surface and they got great candy and pop and whatnot, I mean, there is a whole world of potential liability down below. And so in my world of UST training, I'm always trying to increase risk awareness so people can manage the risk so that these institutions can stay open. So yeah, I see them as just great community centerpieces, and I want to see them continue. Probably half of the people we train are small independent operators, and so I talk to them all the time, and they're great people too. I mean, I think people want maybe more of a human contact than something that's super institutionalized, I guess.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. And it kind of gives you sort of like the warm and fuzzy feel about the small operators, kind of hearing this dialogue about it being, kind of a community hub and all that type of stuff. But I think it's genuinely true. And I think that to Wes's point, that to kind of tie what both of you just said there together, there's this understanding of risk awareness with, it's not just risk for the people that are around the gas station perhaps, but given that you are a small operator, you're a member of that community, that risk transfers to you as well. And so there's more of a connection, I think, to, the risk of managing these tanks filled with hazardous waste or hazardous materials, sorry.
We'll call them flammable liquids.
But I think that's really important. So I guess, with that, maybe we can kind of keep moving here, because I think that the next slide that we've got is about kind of some of the opportunities for small operators, given this changing landscape. I was doing a bit of research before this on, the types, just to find some statistics and stuff like that. And I found three that really jumped out to me from one was a CS News report, and one was something that was done by Coca-Cola on specifically on the convenience store space and convenience store consumers. And the CS News data indicated that 52% of consumers will buy from or shop at companies whose values match their own. The Coca-Cola study said 88% of involved consumers say a company's community and social participation has a positive impact on their purchase intent. 83% of involved consumers say a company's environmental reputation has a positive impact on their purchase intent. From my perspective, seeing these statistics and given what we've just talked about with the, what it is that makes small operators unique, being members of their community, the accessibility of some of the compliance and environmental regulatory type technology to help you actually mitigate the environmental risk that your facility is exposed to, it seems to me like there are opportunities for operators, smaller scale operators, not only to do the right thing, but to benefit from doing the right thing and not just consider it to be a cost. Because if you, as an active member of your community, are letting people know, like, hey, we are doing the right thing when it comes to compliance. All of our people are trained. All of our leak detection records are digitized. We do our inspections and walkthroughs and all this type of stuff. And they may not care about the specifics of the UST regulatory nuances, but hey, we take care of keeping this facility clean to make sure that we're protecting the water. They might get that. And if they get that, then there's a good chance that those consumers will be more interested in continuing to buy from the small operator, thus strengthening their business, than if the operator did the right thing and didn't say anything about it. And Ben, you talked about earlier an operator that you ran into and I think wrote a blog post about, who was doing the right thing, but was totally flying under the radar. Maybe if someone like that was a little bit more proud perhaps of what they were doing from an environmental compliance standpoint, they could drive even more business to their store.
Correct. And even as we're talking, John, I'm kind of thinking it'd be great to have like a little green star decal or something like that. Like, hey, I got 100% on my tank compliance inspection. And so, I mean, or something that would be easy to kind of discern, you'd be able to meet that expectation that people like environmentally reputable, companies. And so it'd be cool to figure out a way. I pulled into a little mountaintop town in Washington and ended up running into an operator, and she was all very nervous because I just showed up out of the blue. Like, I mean, she took my training, I talked to her on the phone, but when I showed up, it was like a big kind of to-do, and she was scurrying around. And I mean, like all my handouts were like taped all over the wall. My business card was on the cash register, and she was like all sweating. I'm like, Bonnie, you're unbelievable. And she's like, no, 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 no. And I ended up writing a blog that was called like, be a rock star operator, be like Bonnie. And she was so concerned that she didn't even see like how far. I said, if everyone was like you, like, I'd be out of business. There'd be no one more to train, kind of thing like that. And so, I mean, I love having experiences like that where they're not even aware about how good they're really doing. She took her job very seriously. Funky little gas station on a little hill overlooking a, shopping plaza. And, what wasn't the prettiest looking gas station, but everyone pulled in there all the time. And so, yeah, I think it'd be interesting to figure out ways how to, I'm kind of thinking about ways so we could maybe make a Green Star program or something to because yeah, people don't care about clean spill buckets, the public or whatever, or, my Vita route's not an alarm or something like that. But it'd be cool to figure out a way how to incentivize people to say, hey, we got a green gas station here, and that's kind of a good thing. So
yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting idea. Wes, from your perspective, I mean, as a small operator, do you see this? I mean, do you see your customers?
It's a valuation to the community. Kind of to Ben's point there, a little bit. Nobody likes the inspector showing on the lot. Ben, no, it's not personal. But to Bonnie's point, as a small operator, you feel like you're being graded, but you're part of the community. It means more. It's not just trying to. I want to do what's right by not only what's legally required, but what's right by my patrons, my customers, and by and large, people appreciate that. And sometimes you get, we have a network of our stores. We have a network of a lot of independents, single shop independents, and not everyone kind of initially understands that. And I think that once people see that. Not only does the owner operator run a better site, but the customers appreciate it as well.
No, I think that's a really good point there, Wes, to kind of tie it all together. Ben, any kind of final thoughts or comments on this before we skip to the next one, which is kind of some takeaways that hopefully the audience can walk away with today?
Yeah, no, I think this is good. I'll be thinking more about ways to. I mean, a lot of this is just like incentivizing. You want to incentivize our customers to see us as good community stewards. And so I would encourage anyone out there to be thinking about, wow, like how could I let my customers know I'm a environmentally responsible operator? Maybe there's some grassroots ideas that are out there amongst the people listening today.
Well, I do know that there is there's a program that was developed. It was called I think it's called Safe Shop or Shop Safe, something like that. Okay. And it was kind of like a certification program that was developed during COVID, where people could get this third-party certification to indicate that they met certain criteria that sort of confirmed that they were a safe place to shop, which included things like the little dots on the floor to keep you 6 feet apart, the plexiglass thing and between the person, some hand sanitizer, stuff like that. That again, small operators who are making the investment in keeping their facilities safe during the peak pandemic time were able to market themselves as doing that. And maybe there's a way to piggyback off a program like that, Ben, to include some of the environmental stuff as well, because even though the Safe Shop program was really designed for the inside of the store, the impact of a fueling facility can go far beyond the confines of that lot or of the four walls of the convenience store. Now, I'm going to just move to the next one here, which is our kind of takeaways. And I think based on our conversations around the regulations, with input from both of you, I think certainly there are lots of opportunities these days to leverage technologies and specialized vendors to keep up with what continues to be an evolving regulatory landscape. Ben is going to be giving a presentation, as we mentioned. Lots of information is available at trade shows these days. And I find that the UST community is a fairly tight-knit community and a supportive community. I think it's been amazing at things like the Tanks Conference, Ben, which I've seen you at, a few times. People are just, everyone kind of knows everybody, and they can usually point you in the right direction if you're looking for a specific technology or something to solve, or a vendor to help you solve a specific problem. So I would certainly encourage people to take advantage of that kind of small community type feel to the UST world. And then I think as a small operator, doubling down on what makes small operators unique, that community focus, the kind of support for the fact that you're a member of the community is really important, and certainly encourage not only small operators to continue to do that, because I think it makes them stand out, but also, as we discussed on the last bit, if you're doing the right thing, be proud of it and don't hesitate to trumpet what you're doing. In a way, you should be like Bonnie, but in another way, Ben, maybe Bonnie should have a little megaphone telling everybody what they're doing, because it might help her, strengthen her business even further. We're seeing a consolidating market, lots of M&A, lots of single store operators shutting down. But at the end of the day, single store operators and small operators represent 60+% of the retail fueling market. And so, if they can, they really are the backbone of the retail fuels industry. And by leaning into strengths, by sharing what they're doing and marketing themselves as responsible members of the community who are dealing with a high-risk site, I think there are real opportunities for them to stand out and have a really good little business. Any kind of thoughts on these takeaways from either of you? Wes, I'll start with you.
Yep. So anytime you're looking at this, we look to leverage what we can, especially when it comes to compliance. So if we're gonna have a compliance expenditure, is there something that we can get from that other than compliance or with the compliance? And not a shameless plug here, but we've used gauges. A lot of the economics around our gauges is that not only does it keep us in compliance, it gives us an eye on the tank, but it allows us to manage inventories. It allows us to to play the market. There are a lot of secondary benefits to a lot of the actions and technology that exist that tie into regulation as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, Wes, no, that's great. Ben, any thoughts from you?
Well, it just occurred to me, we've actually been starting a campaign, I'm tank savvy, right? So we're trying to raise the bar a little bit in our world by saying it's not good enough to kind of meet the minimum requirements. Yeah, really, it comes back to what Wes and I were talking about earlier, getting the right people on the bus. And I know staff is a little crunched right now, but if you get a good person on your team, hold on to them, because that's going to be worth its weight in gold. And so getting good people on board, aspiring to managing, not even necessarily to the regulations, but to the risk. Something might in fact be a legal requirement, but because it creates a certain risk exposure, you might want to spend a little bit more time and effort. I do think, back to what Wes was saying, a lot of these violations can be avoided just by managing your people better and coming up with a battle plan for who's going to do what, when, and how. And then once you have the designation laid out, then all this technology is available at your disposal to plug in and make happen. But especially for the smaller operators, it seems to be a human resource challenge as much as anything. So if you can tackle that, bring in technology, I think you'll be better for it long term, for sure.
Ben, to tack on something there too, is knowing your skill sets of people. We have owner operators, the independents that are amazing. They're technical. Not only are they technologically savvy, they're very engineered minded. They're able to conduct a ton of compliance themselves. We also have folks that that aren't as such, and they're more limited in that area. Be aware, and know what you're comfortable with and know what you're not comfortable with. None of it is insurmountable, and there are resources out there to get you on top of it all. Just know where to draw the line.
Correct. And I want to quote our friend Steve Popora, who's no longer with us, who is a giant in the UST leak prevention world. And Steve often said to me, Ben, hire your weaknesses. Yeah, man up. If you can't do something, I'm a lousy bookkeeper. I hire a bookkeeper, my life just got better, right? And it more than pays for itself. So admitting.
Wes is a good bean counter. You could hire
That's
him.
right. I can count.
Yeah. So, knowing what, yeah, exactly. Knowing what you are and are capable of not doing, and then finding outsourced solutions for that. And yeah, yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Cool. Well, I know, we wanted to open it up for some Q&A here as well. And a couple of questions have come in through the chat here. Here's one that, maybe I think you'll both have some interesting perspective on. So the question is, I've already spent a lot of money upgrading my UST system to meet the new requirements. How serious is the likelihood that my UST system is going to leak after all of that?
I'll jump in here. Leaky underground storage tanks was not a term until 60 Minutes did an expose in like 1984, and all of a sudden it was all over the place. And there's people drinking gasoline all over the country. Fuel tanks are leaking. They estimated that. I mean, the leak failure rate was like 75%. I mean, like most tanks were leaking back in the early 80s, and there was not a control over that. That number has collapsed considerably. The numbers I see range between like 1% and 5% are probably leaking like right now. If we had 100 people in the room here, there might be a leaker among us. So the numbers are the numbers aren't against us. We have 3/4 of the nation's UST has been pulled out of the ground. So that was a risk reduction factor right there. But there's still leakers among us. And I mean, I stopped by a gas station the other day. The tank monitor is blinking red. I said, sir, your tank gauge. He pulled off the tape. He looked at me, crumpled in front of my face. He goes, sir, there is no problem here. I'm like I was shown to the door, right? And I tried to help the guy out. So maybe he's one of those 1% to 5%. So there's a risk of having, a catastrophic release. That is not huge. There's a risk of having a slow ongoing leak that accumulates into something. That's a risk factor out there. Then there's just the risk of not being in compliance. And if all this stuff is broken, you will eventually leak. So the risk factor is not what it used to be, but it's kind of gone underground because now we're looking at much finer points that may or not being tackled. So the risk is definitely out there, but we have come a long way in the same breath.
Yeah, my answer is a lot shorter to that, John. It better not will be my answer to that question.
Please share it with us.
Oh,
so yeah, go ahead.
It's how you run it. I mean, they're getting back to Ben. I mean, there could be some the likelihood of. I'm gonna knock on wood. We've never had any issues, substantial issues with any of our USTs. But if you can put your head in the sand, you will have issues. I mean, I think that's.
Well, I like what Ben said earlier, which is manage to the risk, not to the regulation, right? And think about it from that perspective. I mean, at the end of the day, the equipment that people are putting underground these days is much less likely, Ben, as you said, to leak. However, there are still points where there is going to be, we talked about the common violations, right? And they are, as you guys pointed out, most of them are kind of human error driven problems. There is still a risk of things happening. And if you're not paying attention, things can happen. I mean, think about it. Every time a delivery is made, you're sort of opening up a closed system in order to put more fuel into it. And there's a risk of, fuel getting into that sump, a tank overfilling, so on and so forth. Anytime you're, putting piping together, or upgrading a dispenser, you're going to be disconnecting it. Anytime where there's a touch point between where you're opening a closed system and then putting it back together again, there's going to be a risk of some kind of equipment failure. But also, again, it comes down to understanding the risk and then, leveraging, kind of sensible, cost-effective mechanisms in order to manage that risk. So I think these are all really, really valid points. The other question that came through, are there simple low-cost things I can do to improve my operational compliance? You've kind of touched on some of these things, but are there any specifics that you guys want to share?
Educate your people, spend some time with the folks that the time needs to be spent with them, and let them know, procedurally what's going on. Teach them what this looks like. You've got more context than they do. Whether it's things that aren't easily identifiable. There's a little moisture in the bottom of, I'll set sumps in the bottom of below the dispenser, and you're changing a filter. Make sure the appropriate people know what to look for in the situations that they're put in. That to me is the is the big thing. And it costs nothing, costs some time.
Great.
And making the risk relevant to the person. In other words, like, this is your store, or, if you don't this, then the store gets shut down, kind of thing like that. So understanding, what is it, roles, responsibilities, impacts, and consequences, and it has to be applicable or relevant to the person. You can't just give someone a kind of an abstract duty and have them, so tying it into what the person does. And I know there's incentivizing software out there these days now, where you can be part of almost like a little Facebook group, and it's like, hey, Wes responded to an alarm last Thursday. Here's a $50 credit to Cabela's or something like that. But I'm all about incentivizing people to know, if they do good behavior, they get personal reward from it. And if they don't, then there's a problem for the business. So just thinking about creative ways how to make that stuff relevant and incentivizable to the end user, I think is big.
Well, and perhaps, to tie it back to some of the statistics that we saw about consumer preferences, maybe the, direct tie is, start talking to your customers about what you're doing from an environmental standpoint, because that might be just incentive enough to know that the people coming in every single day care. Could be enough to get the people that are on site thinking about it, because they're not just thinking about it as another task to be done, but they're thinking about it because, Johnny or Betty or whoever came in the store, and it matters to them too, and it'll keep them coming back if they continue to do the right thing. So compliance is a tough one, because it can be viewed as just this kind of bottomless pit of cost. But, I do think based on some of the evolving preferences of consumers, there can be a real benefit from a business standpoint to driving them back to you, because as a small operator, you are a upstanding member of the community doing the right thing for you and everybody around you. So any final comments or thoughts there before we wrap things here? Cool. Well, I think that about does it. We are out of time. I'm going to go ahead and flip to the last slide here for anyone dialing in. If you want to continue this conversation, we're more than happy to do it. I think, as you can tell from just the last 40 minutes or so, this is something that I think Wes and Ben obviously are deeply involved in and deeply care about, myself as well. And would certainly love to continue the dialogue with anybody who's interested. So our contact information is here. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But appreciate everybody dialing in. Ben, Wes, thank you so much for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you back out there at some upcoming events and whatnot. And
can I make one more pitch?
Please.
There are a ton of networking and education opportunities out there across the country. Restrictions have lifted out a bit. There's petroleum trade shows all over the country. There's tank conferences all over the country. Reach out to your local provider. Petroleum Equipment Institute has and there's a lot of webinar Zoom stuff too. And so there's really unlimited opportunities, I think, for small operators to have access to a lot of people, whether it's live or remote. And so look for those schedules and get involved in your local petroleum trade association or who's ever hosting any sort of event like that to help you be a better operator.
I want to piggyback on what Ben said there too. Something that we've started doing is we're going to have, for all of our customers, not just our sites, but for all of our customers, we're going to bring in, we're having a meeting that essentially is going to be regulatory education and meet some of the compliance standards. So bring in some folks from the state to to essentially teach our customers. So you're not coming to this some meeting and leaving with nothing. When you get done, you get Class B certified. So those opportunities are out there, like Ben said. So keep your eyes open.
Sounds like the two of you need to talk about that event.
Well, and
you write each other's emails down.
Really. And Wes, actually, as during this call, my Kentucky AB operator training course got approved like 2 minits ago. So we'll have some more. Yeah, we'll have some more training options for you in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Excellent.
Well, how about that? That's a great note to end on. But yeah, thank you guys for joining. Really appreciate the time, and thank you everybody for dialing in and listening. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue, virtually, in person, however it ends up happening. But yeah, thanks everyone, and we will look forward to being in touch.
Take care.
See you.